We're going to be discussing the idea of the false binary.
What an illusion of choice does, it establishes the baseline assumptions that nobody questions.
This is part of the fifth generation warfare that we've talked about. Voting for the lesser of two evils. It's definitely an emotional, psychological trap that people are in.
You're cheerleading for an insane ideology because you think you're winning.
The role we have as media, how do we help everybody understand this is theater and you need to get back into the real world?
If you're opposed to the agenda, you should oppose it regardless of who's selling it to you.
Friday, June 6, 2025. Welcome to the Independent Media Alliance. We're here to discuss Palantir. Obviously, not even much more is needed to explain what that conversation is regarding today, seeing as how it's everywhere. In a very interesting way, it seems to have consumed even the corporate media conversation. And so we thought it was very relevant to have this panel to discuss, from start to finish, where this came from, what it's about, how it built into what it is now, where it seems to be going, and a lot of other kind of identity politics around it all. So I thought it'd be interesting to start with, of course, briefly discuss the interesting kind of feud between the two, not because of the entertainment of it all, but because of how interesting the timing is between Elon Musk and Donald Trump and how that might relate to the Palantir point. And so I'll go ahead and just start with my point that I think it's interesting, the timing of how this feud played out. I personally think that it seems very like there are elements that seem to be some kind of a personality clash. I thought that was obvious with their egos, but I'm not really buying it. Some of it feels a little bit staged. And I'm just wondering if that might be done to pull away from the very clear awareness from all sides, including the corporate media, which I don't take at face value, of the Palantir database. So just whoever wants to jump in, what are your thoughts on that?
I'll just share real quick. It's been interesting the last week because I noticed, right away the spike in discussion around Palantir and, on Twitter and everywhere else. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And found the New York Times story, which, by the way, I think myself, Whitney, and others here have reported essentially everything that's in there other than them claiming, according to some anonymous sources, this is going on. I know I did videos when Trump did that first executive order that they were discussing, which is kind of removing some barriers between different agencies. So it's been interesting to kind of, watch that play out, not only, as you said, Ryan, in the mainstream, but then seeing the way MAGA's treating it. And I'm sure we're going to get more into this, but, just off the top of my head, the ones I'm sure you guys have all heard that we already have surveillance. This is no big deal. What are you guys tripping about? It's not any different. So whatever, or the, of course, Q and other hopium crowd. This is actually to surveil the deep state. They're not going to be spying on regular people. They're going to use Palantir to suss out which of the deep state agents are involved in these crimes. Yes, there are articles and Substacks and things of that sort and Twitter threads all claiming that. So yeah, it's been interesting to watch this. Of course, I think in general, the fact that everybody's talking about Palantir, probably a good thing. And of course, there's a lot more angles, but yeah, that's been my initial thoughts this first week or so that everyone's finally waking up to it.
And then the feud. And if I may, Jason, I know you're the one who usually calls like the MMA fights and stuff like that, but I feel like what's happening right now deserves more of a classic, late 90s, early 2000s WWE style promo. And for what's really going on, I feel like it's more of like a Sunday, Elon Musk versus Donald Trump in the squared circle, and then all of a sudden they're going to wind up being tag team partners in like 3 weeks. Again, like they're going to have the dramatic falling out. And somebody's going to get flipped over a table like Vince McMahon did, back when Donald Trump flipped him over a table. Maybe someone ritualistically shaved Elon's head. Maybe we get the full cartoon out of it. But what this looks like to me at the moment when the only company that Elon Musk owns that isn't fully subsidized by U.S. taxpayers through federal government contracts in Tesla was tanking. All of a sudden, now he's mad at Donald Trump, and like clockwork, liberals are like, oh, well, Elon's mad at Donald Trump. I guess we like him again. We'll go ahead and buy Tesla. And I mean, it's just, it is predictability to the point of laughability, except for it's actually happening in the world that we live in. And I'm in the North Bay in California, in Marin County, where like we've driven by Elon Musk protests and the big Tesla dealership right up the road, and it's been cartoonish the entire time. So to watch the fallout play out this way, as scripted as I believe it is still, it's got high entertainment value.
So let me jump in here really quick on it because, for me, I do wonder how much of this, even if it is real, does it matter? Are any of his defense contracts going away? Is the Boring Company not going to be building underground bases? Obviously, there was a little bit of tossing around in the media about NASA and SpaceX leaving NASA. It can't leave NASA. That's not a real thing. That's like imagination land times 1,000. I did hear something interesting today that just did come to mind. Literally an hour ago, Roger Stone was on InfoWars, and he was talking about the big, beautiful bill and the part of the Golden Dome initiative inside of it. And I've been doing videos on this even before the bill, that this is essentially, to me, is a software and hardware update of the capabilities that were put out there in the 80s and 90s. And I even went back to Edward Teller, who's huge in UFO lore, who was the head of this program, and he was giving press conferences and baselining what reality was versus fiction there. And of course, you can take that with a grain of salt. But I do believe that that is actually happening. Like, that's a big push. I think they're doing that no matter what bill passes. I don't know whether that's really a contention with Musk or he feels like he's getting cut out. You have to realize Starlink right now is an extension of that program. It is the commercial program. The Defense Department has a backdoor into it. And when they launch those satellites, which again, the highest concentration right now of the dishes is still in Ukraine, because it's not just communication systems, it's directly into those AI drones that I'm sure we're going to be discussing that Anduril, Palantir are so fond of. And that's a big part of it. But you also have to realize that DARPA has been putting up their Blackjack network through Musk. Again, NASA, SpaceX, that's just another rebrand. They're not going anywhere. So I think it is a personality clash. I've always questioned how much Musk is really running these companies in the first place. And even with Tesla, yes, you have that car part, but we have to also realize that they're the autonomous robot company as well. They're the ones that are bringing in the humanoid Optimus bot. So I think a lot of this is smoke and mirrors. You know, Derek just mentioned that Palantir was getting some mainstream play and pushback from the new conservative alt media, which I think is a good thing. But I don't think people understand the extent to which they're already involved, right? So that I hope that we could talk about that mostly, like where they all already are at and all these other companies. And basically, I don't even know that they're vying for supremacy. I think that they're vying for their spot as the next Raytheon, Lockheed Martin in that circle. But that's my opinion.
Oh, well, since Jason Bassler is joining. Oh, he's going to jump in right there. I was going to say, let's go to him next. Nice to have you on for the first time on the panels, brother. So go ahead and jump in.
Thank you, man. Yeah, nice to be with you guys. A bunch of legends in here. I was just going to point out briefly that don't forget Trump and Elon were kind of at odds with each other even before the bromance began. Like, I remember Trump said something like Musk is a bullshit artist. Musk said that Trump is too old to run. So I don't know if they really even had this the connection to begin with. Maybe this was all just the smoke and mirrors. Maybe this was all just the optics and the facade, you know? And yeah, Palantir, obviously, as Derek pointed out, we mentioned here already, like, was blowing up. I mean, I've gotten more traction on just the past few days on my Twitter account than I have in a couple months talking about Palantir. And I noticed as well that the right, yeah, they were questioning it. Like, they thought it was fake news coming from the New York Times, rightfully so. But it just goes to show how far behind they are the ball when it comes to Palantir and these topics and the technocracy and everything that's kind of going hand in hand with AI and this infrastructure being built behind the scenes. And if it was a distraction, this whole Elon Trump thing, it'd certainly be good timing because the right is kind of clueless to all this. So like, when would there be a better time to, throw this out there? And maybe, the bromance is over because the theatrics and the show of the election's over, and they had to kind of break it off anyway and go their separate routes. And I know Derek pointed out my rebuttal tweet on Elon's bombshell post there, which basically was like, this is, the only path that you have left, Elon, is to go towards voluntarism. And not necessarily because I thought he was going to do that, but it was more just a plug for the ideology itself. But yeah, all this to me, it definitely seems suspicious, and it seems like perfect timing to really cover up the conversation that seemed to be formulating about Palantir.
Well, if anybody else wants to comment on it, we don't all have to, if I think a lot of that's been addressed, but if anyone wants to jump in, Kid or Charlie, go ahead. I'll just add that I think both are possible. I agree with what you said there, Jason. Let's not forget it. Most of his inner circle, right before they got inside the inner circle, were like, Trump's an idiot. He's a grifter. All of them, including JD Vance and everybody, Elon Musk. And so maybe they never really liked each other. Maybe they always hate each other, but they also work together. So I'm of the mind that there's a larger one government agenda. And so it's hard not to see some of this ego kind of split being real, but it also could be, both can be true is the point. And I think that's important.
You didn't mention one important name that I think is like the name we need to mention, Peter Thiel. Talk about leaving. Peter Thiel was his technology advisor in the first administration. Then when it was very clear that there was massive corruption in the 2020 election, you'd already seen Thiel distancing himself, but he totally and completely abandoned him at that point. And you didn't really hear much from the Thiel crowd, I would say, until about 18 months before the election. I think when they realized, hey, maybe he's not going to jail, maybe he's going to beat these things, maybe we get it on board. Then all of a sudden Vance comes into the picture. That is Peter Thiel, Palantir 101. And then you really saw, they say it's Barron Trump. Barron said, podcast and pop, that's what you need to do. I question that. I'm not saying that his kid's not smart and that wasn't brought in and maybe pushed him into it, but that very, very much looked like a concerted effort by, I would say, the new technocrats, if you will, to push him in that arena. When you saw Thiel alone on Joe Rogan just before the old Trump star, and they're talking Epstein, which is another obviously huge part of this thing that we're talking about right now, I knew something was up. And I kind of already realized that, Trump on this podcast tour was going to end at Rogan, and lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And what was that a predecessor by? Elon Musk on there as well. So I think it's almost impossible, right, not to talk about these things. I think there are personality and power clashes. Another big thing happening right now is that Thiel is about to meet with his quote-unquote left-wing counterpart, Eric Schmidt, and now Jen Stoltenberg, who is a steering member on Bilderberg in Sweden next week. And that's not being talked about by any of the alt media. There's literally not one mainstream story on the upcoming meeting. God bless Charlie Skelton, Dan Dix, and others that are going out to cover it, because this year's really important.
Well, I'll just add one more thing related. I was just going to add one thing to the whole feud thing before we kind of move full on to Palantir and Peter Thiel. That for those who out there, my personal belief, I think maybe most of us, but I know we have differing opinions, is that Trump has been an op from the beginning. That's my longtime belief for any potential positive. And I think that's been borne out over time, like him being brought in to be a disruptor because of, all his relationships and things that they may have on him. But for those who don't have that view in the audience and who are more inclined to think Trump is good or good to some degree, things of that sort of thing, and believe that it's the deep state, even in the form of Elon Musk, working against him. I saw a theory out there that I think is worth at least putting into people's consciousness, and the idea that even if Trump was fully with Musk and the technocrats and the people really pulling the strings, or even if there was some kind of differences, I do think what Jason said is accurate, that it's not whether they get along or not doesn't necessarily mean that they fully agree on everything. I tend to tell people the ruling class is going to agree with each other over the people every day of the week. That doesn't mean they get along every day and don't have their own disagreements. But when it comes to the people or them, they're going to choose to work together and collaborate. And so with that in mind, if you do have this mindset that Trump was trying to fight the deep state, one viewpoint is that Musk and maybe Thiel and others who we know have a relationship going back to the PayPal mafia. And as Jason mentioned, Thiel with JD Vance, we all know he funded JD Vance's Senate run. And Peter Thiel did in the end come out last year and say that he supported Trump and Vance. He wasn't going to give money, but he did indirectly give money in other ways. But nevertheless, if you took that view, it could be possible that they helped Trump get in there, got all their minions in place, because as I've reported, Doge is full of Palantir and Peter Thiel acolytes, as is Trump's administration, from Vance on down to many other powerful people, and then stage or have a real breakup and break things off from Trump. And at that point, maybe they don't care because they've already got all their guys and all their pieces in place, right? So that's a charitable view, I think, for the Trump folks. I don't really, again, see Trump as a hero defending, the American people against the deep state. But either way, it could be that there's some element of that, that they've got everything done. The whole thing could just be a distraction to distract us, as Jason Bassler was saying, that, last week, everybody's talking about Palantir and now it's about this. And is Trump in the Epstein files? And that's a whole nother thing, right? But it's the trending thing of the week. And my belief, and I think most of us here, we understand the role that the algorithm plays. There's always going to be some thing for us to be outraged every week or to be trending and for us to be talking about. And we're playing right into it in many ways. It's important to dissect them, but I do think the bigger picture is Palantir and the role that they're playing.
Absolutely. And I think the whole point of that being discussed is because it's hard to decouple these things. And I think, whether it's just the kind of theater of it all and whether that relates to the story or, the involvement of both of them in this large idea. And so to my point was that if you saw the story coming out, and which we all know that Elon was, at least as now more so framed, was the main reason that Thiel was involved with the administration. And you start to wonder if he's just kind of being framed as the scapegoat for why this all happened. Even Palantir, even the database, everything, Doge, investigations. I think some people would take that bait. And so I thought it was worth just kind of tossing that around to consider how that might play a factor. And so let's talk about in general, and then I'll just show this too, since you guys mentioned it. This was the statement that kind of did add a little bit of that's hard to pretend like this would be stated if it wasn't, basically Elon Musk just says time to drop the big bomb and says that Trump's in the Epstein files, which is what we were referring to. So it's hard to see that as a play, but I do think they're in a desperate position. I think the Palantir discussion is really uncomfortable for the entire government, partisanship aside. So let's start with a discussion of Palantir itself. If anybody wants to start, Derek, you're a good one to go to in regard to kind of the background. If you want to just talk about what Palantir is and where it came from.
I'll add a couple things.
I'd like to talk about the total information awareness kind of overlap and where it got to today. So anybody wants to jump in, but go ahead, Derek, you can start.
Should we have everybody introduce themselves too as well? I saw some comments asking who different faces are, because I know we've got a couple new people.
Sure, yeah.
And they were asking about myself and Kit and Jason. Well, just maybe as you go around, not necessarily right this second, but they were asking about me and Kit and Jason. I'm Derek Brose from the Conscious Resistance Network. So whoever.
Yo, everybody. Jason Bassler, Free Thought Project, and Police the Police.
Charlie Robinson from Activist Post and Macroaggressions.
Kit Knightley from Off Guardian.
My name is T. Snyder. You can find me at theconspiracysynergy.com.
There you
go. Jason Burmis, I didn't realize it was backwards. I really hate these settings that mirror your image for no reason. We're going to try to save that. We all know where to find me.
Just for that note, that's just my, I think it's important to do that. I'm just so adverse. I barely even say my name when I start my show. So if that's something, feel free to do that every time, guys. And I did see someone ask about some people there. So thank you, Derek. But back to the point on that, if you want to jump in, I think it's important for those that may not know the, kind of the connective point to total information awareness, even today more so with main core and kind of how it played a role before today. So go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually where I wanted to start. And I do want to credit two people who are part of the IMA who are not here today, both James Corbett and Whitney Webb, who've been, among others here, writing about Palantir for some time. And so I encourage people to go check out Unlimited Hangout. Whitney actually did a collaborative investigation with Jeremy Lafredo back in 2020 called Palantir's Tiberius Race and the Public Health Panopticon. And it was really about the relation to COVID, because there's a whole history there. There's a whole history of COVID, and Palantir. But what you're talking about, Ryan, I think is really the key point. And whoever doesn't have their mic muted, if you guys don't mind, I'm hearing a little feedback. The Total Information Awareness Program was started after 9/11, for those who might not remember. And it's the one you've seen out there, I'm sure, that has the all-seeing eye pyramid logo looking over the world. And because it was controversial, it's as weird as it sounds, and I keep trying to remind people of this, that just 20 years ago, people actually did give a crap about privacy. That's been lost in such a short time. But 20 years ago, even with all the 9/11 hysteria, a lot of people were concerned and were speaking out about this program that was really seeking to monitor all of our lives in many ways that have now been achieved. So there was actually some pushback. It went from being called Total Information Awareness to the Terrorist Information Awareness Program. They had to change it to try to soften it. But by the end of 2003, it ended up being shut down because of the controversy. Now, that's at least the mainstream story. I think we all know that they just took the different pieces of that program and kind of distributed them among different agencies. And it's around this time that Palantir is getting started. And Whitney and Jeremy, they mentioned this article from, I think it was 2003. It was a New York Magazine report that talked about how John Poindexter, who comes from U.S. intelligence and military, he actually met up with Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, who, by the way, are both steering committee members of the Bilderberg Group. And as Jason said, Bilderberg's getting ready to meet. And they met with the Poindexter, then basically got all the tips and information they needed to start a private surveillance program that they couldn't do through the government with Total Information Awareness. So that's basically the start of Palantir. And of course, besides Peter Thiel's own investments, the CIA's venture capital firm NQTEL was their first investment. So from the beginning, from 2003 or 2004, sometimes they say they were founded in 2004. It looks like they may have been started earlier than they claim. There's a lot of kind of uncertainty about that. But yeah, from the very beginning, the CIA, through the venture capital firm and through Poindexter and the Total Information Awareness Program, were directly intertwined and interconnected to Palantir and Alex Karp and Peter Thiel. And since then, of course, now 20 years later, they're very influential. They now have this massive relationship with Trump's second White House, and they're helping kill Palestinians. I mean, they're involved with all kinds of different things that we've been covering recently at TLAV, which is why I've started to call this the Palantir World Order.
I think it's something crazy like 30 different agencies Palantir's interwoven themselves within.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that note, so go ahead and elaborate on that, Jason. Do you mean in regard to like previously in just the overlap, or specifically with like the AI data mining discussion of today? Because it's gotten even worse with that.
I don't know that for sure, but I do know that, as Derek was just saying, that this has been something that's been going on through the Obama administration, through the Biden administration, the first Trump administration. I would assume that there is definitely overlap with the AI stuff, but yeah, I couldn't tell you for sure. But if you guys don't mind me jumping in just really quick, this might be a little off track, maybe jumping ahead just slightly, but I do need to go in a few minutes. But I did want to talk about some of the predictive policing stuff, because that's important to me. I think you guys probably know, most of you guys know, I've been doing Police the Police, and the Free Thought Project is really focused on police accountability over the past decade. And we've seen a lot of similar stories that's come up around the predictive policing that has involved innocent people. And this is something that definitely worries me, because Palantir builds the software that basically aggregates the data for various law enforcement records. They take surveillance footage, license plate readers, social media stuff, and it's all to identify hotspots where crimes might occur. Flag individuals as potential offenders or associates based on their network or past behavior. It generates risk scores for people, often without their knowledge or consent. And this has already been happening. I think it was Los Angeles in 2009, 2010. They had what's called a laser program. And same thing with New Orleans. They actually partnered with the New Orleans Police Department without any public knowledge or city council approval to implement these predictive systems that track the gang members and affiliates. And that's kind of just crazy and by itself, that they're just kind of subverting any type of local government, and it's, putting themselves in that position. And these predictive algorithms, they generate the risk scores and all that stuff. But as Larry Ellison said, who was on stage with Trump when he announced the $500 billion Stargate project last year, he said citizens will be on their best behavior. And he basically elaborated that AI would monitor various sources, including security cameras, police body cameras. And he said that AI would monitor all those things, including vehicle dash cams. And as I was saying, this is worrisome because these systems fail at arresting, all the time. They arrest innocent people. There's no due process. Raises questions about like bias algorithms. And if cops are wearing body cameras that use this real-time facial recognition to analyze people that they come in contact with, it's definitely going to end up in a database somewhere. I should also mention that the license plate readers in the US is exploding. The ACLU reports that roughly 85% of law enforcement agencies deploy these license plate readers. I'm sure you guys have all heard about flock cameras. There's over 42 states, 4,000 cities that have these flock cameras in them. And Forbes last year reported that FedEx had partnered with flock cameras to put on these license plate readers on their trucks. And FedEx isn't the only people too. It's Kaiser Permanente, it's Lowe's, it's quite a few different places. Of course, Amazon Ring, and they all collaborate with law enforcement. Apparently, there's one company called the Digital Recognition Network. It claims it's a subsidiary of Motorola. It claims it's produced 250 plate readings a month, and it's amassed 23 billion license plate scans since its inception. So, if we're talking about building databases, like all this stuff is going to be put in there. It's going to be, flagging people, and basically algorithms are going to be predicting what they do. So it destroys due process, and it really shifts policing from evidence-based action to preemptive suspicion.
And it's hard not to overlap that with many other things and many other topics, but many other things around the world, like we saw with, for example, what's happening with the genocide in Gaza and the testing of those things using threat scores to determine certain people with the AI. It's the same thing. But even the overlap you discussed with things like the way things are going in places like Prospera, the teal-backed libertarian, authoritarian government is taking over Honduras, or in El Salvador. There's different overlaps to all of this, and you can see the same building aspects of this. And you pointed out the agency point, and so it goes. Well, actually, before I go into that, anybody else have any comments on the police overlap? And I'll take a step back on that because I want to go into all the different agencies that you were mentioning there. But the police part goes back a long way, and then I'll let anybody jump in. Well before this, and remember, this is Trump's last administration, and then it even overlapped through Biden's administration. And so this is nonpartisan, and it's been building for a long time. And the police part is just now dovetailing with everything else, it seems. So anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I just want to add quickly that Teslas are snitch vehicles. They have contracts with fusion centers. Ford Motor Company is trying to do something very similar with a lot of pushback. There's new surveillance up for speed cameras. 33, in fact, brand new speed detection cameras have been placed all over the city of San Francisco and on the bridges and stuff like that. It's going to a point to where people are going to be forced into the driverless vehicle, because every time you get behind the wheel, broadly, most motorists can commit some sort of infraction. It's just something that everybody does a little bit all the time, whether or not you're a little bit over the speed limit, or you fail to, hit your brakes at a proper distance, but put your turn signal on at a proper distance. If we're having surveillance done digitally that only knows what the actual motor vehicle code says and isn't even taking into account flow of traffic or any of this other stuff, then everybody's going to get multiple tickets all day, every day.
I mean, that old statement about, at any given moment, because of how ridiculous our legal system is and all the laws in place going back centuries, that everyone's, they could make you are all a felon if they want you to be, is the point. I forget how that statement goes, but they've made that clear before. They could just choose to pick the law out that you're breaking, and everyone is at current moment. That's wild. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say they're putting, even in manual cars, they're putting remote control kill switches in. So like even if you refuse the auto drive, you're going to have a kill switch. And I believe in Europe they're going to be mandatory in all new cars made after like 2015 or something.
Wow.
And the problem is, and we touched on the AI thing as well. We're all talking about the idea of pre-crime here, essentially, and that's what it is. But we're talking about the idea of pre-crime working, but it could easily not work. And as we talk about with the AI stuff, people are already throwing over their own judgment, their own ideas for what the AI tells them is true. A police officer in 10 years' time will simply have a facial recognition scan, and it will tell him, yeah, that's the guy. Even if it doesn't look like the photograph, he will override that. And you could end up in some sort of weird Kafkaesque situation where the facial recognition software says you're somebody you're not. And there will be no safeguards in place.
Right. Well, this is a perfect overlap then to, I mean, so the obvious point of where this is built forward and how it's been set up and a nonpartisan idea, you know, this surface level kind of acknowledgement of what's been building or been there, the database of all American information. You know, this overlaps with like the where it's going discussion, the artificial intelligence overlap to the bigger point in all of this. So before we go into all of that, what Jason was saying, Jason Bassler, is just that the point of all the different, I was looking this up this morning just to make sure there wasn't anything new, just so it's on the record. It's so far, and this is my question before about whether you're talking about Palantir and other agencies, by other groups, by the way, just simply being involved with the government in a lot of ways and being part of their different agencies. What I'm referring to is that in addition to what we're now discussing of them having access through Doge and other discussions, all of the databases that they've now removed the silos from and pushed them into one central point for the most part, and using it to train their models, their large language models, their AI. This has been publicly discussed. Now, the AI bill, which we can touch on as well, or rather the Trump's bill, I refuse to call it the big, beautiful bill, discussing the idea of 10 years of not oversight for AI and the different AI components to new government, which it looks like the Senate's going to push back on now. But the point is it's there, and it's all comes back to what they're using it for. Now, that's Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, IRS, ICE, Social Security, the GSA, USAID, Department of Energy, Department of Education, the FAA, FEMA, NIH, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Treasury Department. And then you can even overlap that with the health side of it with RFK Jr.'s database on health information, or even Oracle overlap with Stargate. All of this using AI, that's almost hard to imagine. You know what I mean? That much information being jammed together. I mean, go ahead. I'll leave it there. I just think that's very important to realize that, you know, in a lot of ways, some of the people, especially in the partisan field, are missing the forest for the trees by talking about this bigger discussion, but not realizing, as we've said, it's been going on a long time and that it's, I think, done at this point, right? I mean, a few more agencies to go, but go ahead. Anyone want to jump in on that?
Well, let me jump in on that because I think it goes beyond agencies, right? So, number one, I think people have to realize that you have a social credit score on Apple if you've ever bought a device or anyone around you has bought a device. Same thing with Google. These things came out, more than a decade ago. I think that you look at other big companies, Microsoft, you got an Xbox, I'm sure, or you're on Windows, they've got something similar there. PlayStation, Sony. I would say that those databases are also going to be incorporated. I didn't name the big one. You know, everybody talked about the Total Information Awareness Network. Well, there's always been those rumblings of a Facebook connection, right? And then you look at Facebook, and really when it was pushed over the top past these other social media platforms, who was it? Peter Thiel stepped in. Sean Parker stepped in. So when you look at that, and you look at these new data centers that are being proposed, the one in Kentucky that's currently being built for Meta, I think that that's going to be as much of an incorporation as those government databases, as the autonomous cars that we were talking about. Basically, when we are talking about total information awareness, we're even getting not only into the Internet of Things being centralized by this AI and analyzed, but also the Internet of Bodies. And, you know, the RAND Corporation and others have been very open about that as well. And look, I'm as guilty as anybody. I got the damn watch on. I take the damn walk and see how quick I do my 2 miles. I wear it when I'm in the car and someone calls me or texts me. I don't want to, you know, touch it. I'll hit that and I'll start talking into this. I know some people aren't as comfortable with that, but I think it's only going to get more. I think that we have to be aware and navigate it, pick and choose our battles. Like, I would be stupid I've got probably 7 game systems that have been built in the last decade plus. They all have microphones in them. They're in the damn controllers at this point. You know how many phones are sitting around my house right now? Yeah, they're off, but I think that we all know that there are ways to access these things without people knowing. So I think right now, big picture, Palantir is trying to become that like Oracle of the Lord of the Rings. That, you know, one ring to rule them all that stuff, not just government stuff, but all the public stuff and all the contracting. I mean, really, that is what we've been seeing anyway, is the merger of government and corporations on a techno-fascistic level that's really never been imagined before. But now it's starting to be achieved. And that's like the real danger, right?
Yeah, I think there's the temptation to think that all of this is just starting now, within the last 5 years, whatever. When you go back to 2004, you've got 2 origin stories happening simultaneously. You have, out of In-Q-Tel, you have Facebook and the Peter Thiel connection that you just mentioned. And you have Palantir starting about the same time, coming out of In-Q-Tel with Karp running that and this role. So you can make a case that this has been on the plan for 2 decades, that this isn't something that's just new. Maybe the technology has caught up. Maybe when Minority Report comes out in 2002, that technology is futuristic. The future's now. Half the stuff that we saw in that movie is happening. Pre-crime was inconceivable 2 decades ago. Now it's normalized almost and talked about as a real thing. So I think that they have been plotting and planning this for a very long time. And the role of these technocrats is extremely dangerous. It's tempting to be dismissive of Elon Musk and go, oh, you know, he's just a quirky nerd who builds companies. But it's like, well, peel back a layer or two and see where this guy's money is coming from. See who the connection is coming from. Much in the same way that Palantir was started to service the CIA. What about Oracle? I mean, Oracle was named after the project that the CIA was, Project Oracle, that they were working on. And so this has been going on since 77 in that regard. So it's a long play. And I think that for those, I put the Palantir conversation in the same category as the USAID conversation. Nothing's changed. Nothing's really getting fixed, but at least some of the normies are starting to talk about it. They didn't know about USAID 3 years ago. I mean, we're all talking about it and doing episodes, but now you've got your hairstylist, maybe not mine, but somebody's hairstylist out there going, what do you make of this whole USAID thing? Well, you could take them down a long rabbit hole, but the point is, at least it's on their radar now. And Palantir, same thing. Like, what is this Palantir? You know, now they're starting with Peter Thiel. I thought he was just a guy who's bad on Rogan and stuttered and mumbled his way through a 3-hour conversation. It's like, no. That guy is extremely dangerous, and this is what his company is about. So, I mean, I guess if we're going to take a very tiny white pill, like maybe the size of a Tic Tac, it'll be that some of the normies are starting to open their eyes to these agencies or these corporations that are driving the future.
Such a good point, Charlie. And here's where the bait and switch administration comes in, right? Because what happened to USAID? It got absorbed into the State Department. And so Palantir has been a quote unquote third party contractor. Even though it's always rode that public-private partnership fence, it's been a private entity face. Now it's part and parcel of the government. So the bait and switch part is, sure, you can talk about it now that it's a part of the government. But in 4 years, it's just going to be one of the underpinning key systems that allow for efficiency and thorough management of this greatest democracy.
And this is why we started with the point about the feud, because as they were highlighting, this is how this not to say we know for sure, but this is how this tends to go, especially when they recognize people are starting to see through all the BS, all the partisan lies. They do something like that. They create, rather, you know, like you're saying, the average person sees USAID. Instead of changing that, they give you the false dynamic and they allow you to, you know, lean into that thinking that, oh, now it's gone, but they just added something else. And I think that's possibly the whole point about what's going on with Palantir. You know, is someone else going to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to take that white pill, put 2 black pills either side of it, and flip it black like in Go, because like you could argue that the normies talking about it is very much part of the point. I mean, the concept we're talking about here is called the panopticon, right? And I don't know if everybody, probably most of us know the history of the word, but some people in the audience might not. It goes back to the 18th century. Utilitarian philosopher Jeremy Bentham invented what he called the perfect prison, which is a circular prison with a single guard tower in the middle, and all the cells are visible to the top of the guard tower at all times. Now, most of the cells, most of the prisoners are not being watched, but they are perfectly aware that any one of them could be. The idea of the panopticon is that the idea you might be being watched encourages you to police yourself. As Larry Ellison said, people are going to be on their best behavior. So in some ways, they have to tell us it's there, or it won't work.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I have trouble with it being. I have trouble with it. The idea that people, I mean, not to say again, take the black pill that anytime any people are waking up, it's always a psyop, et cetera, because I see those people out there and I'm not totally in agreement with that. But yeah, of course, it makes me a little skeptical or questioning why it's safe now. I'm not going to name any names, but there are definitely a lot of big podcasts and folks who I know lots of people here were pointing out Palantir connections prior to the election, and they were all still there and pretty obvious in my mind. I know I wrote a lot of articles about that. And Ryan, I know you did hours and hours of coverage of this and others here. And now 6 months into the thing, everybody's willing to talk about Palantir and Peter Thiel, and it's become safe now. And so, yeah, good that more people are talking about it. Good that the hairdressers talking about it. And maybe there's some seeping into normie mind out there, but also it is good, I think, to remain skeptical and question, or, just even have a critical mind about why it's happening at this time. And I did want to go into some Doge and Peter Thiel in a minute, but Charlie, I think, did you have something you want to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Well, Derek, before you do that real quick, just since you mentioned it, I just think this is humorous and we don't have to spend time on this, but the point is about, remember a lot of people, almost everybody here was calling out, a lot of things, but in Palantir being a focal point before all this, and it was black pill purity test. I just thought it's very funny now, and I hate to take pleasure in the chaos that's happening between the MAGA community, but to see the way that they're responding to this stuff now is interesting to me, where Cat Turd came out and said, pay close attention to all the people who don't have President Trump's back right now. And I said, this is what a purity test actually looks like. Sycophant clowns like this guy tried to say that what we were doing was exactly, or I said what we were doing when we tried to warn you about exactly what's taking place was the purity test. I just think it's interesting to see how much what's just happened is exposing, the kind of hollowness, the hypocrisy around, and in my opinion is all partisan, like extremism, the team sport politics side. So I thought that's important to point out, because it's hard to battle something like that when they've got so much influence and it's all like personal identity politics, woke left, woke right. All right, go ahead.
Well, and again, just real quick, it's like 3-card money, but it's 3-card psyop money. So if it's okay to talk about Palantir now, that means nobody's talking about Larry Ellison or Sam Altman or the Stargate going international at this point, the mRNA platform Stargate going international at this point. There's, a pick-up oligarch, if Elon Musk or if, Peter Thiel are taken front and center. Well, hey, look, there's still 3 other guys from the PayPal mafia that are embedded within the Trump administration that aren't garnering all the headlines. But like Carlin said, you don't necessarily need an organized conspiracy when everybody involved all went to the same schools, is all part of the same clubs, all have the same overarching, goals and stuff like that. If Musk and Thiel are taking all of the oxygen out of the information, everybody else in the PayPal mafia is running around rampant, not to mention Howard Lutnick, not to mention all of the other people that are part and parcel of advancing the panopticon-esque agenda that we've been talking about on the panel so far.
Oh, and if we're going to speculate as to who might be pulled into this next, I'm going to put my money on Lucky Palmer. I mean, because he wears a Hawaiian shirt, he's got the branding. He's just a wacky, kooky nerd who, he's looking out for America, and he's building these. You can easily see him getting incorporated in, and like Steve says, when the magician wants you to look at his right hand, you have to keep an eye on his left hand. That's what, that's pulling the bird out of the back pocket or whatever. So it's in some cases, it's not necessarily who they're talking about now. It's who who the spotlight is no longer on. Exit stage right, and now that guy is off to go do his thing. Musk leaves. What's he up to? Well, he's up to whatever the agenda is, but he doesn't have that massive spotlight on him. He might not be the best example because he's always putting a spotlight on himself, but some of the lesser characters, as they exit the stage, they're now free to do what they're doing without the audience watching them.
So I'm so glad you brought up Lucky Palmer, because he's going to play into really what I wanted to talk about. We haven't hit on Lavender. We haven't hit on the fact that Palantir is very much a part of the Five Eyes operation. So it is an international intelligence network, and Lavender, which just picked through AI 30,000 plus quote unquote terrorists, aka targets, that can be taken out by autonomous drones and machines made by Lucky Palmer. I think that's really important. So I was really unaware of Lucky Palmer probably until the last few months, when all of a sudden he's on a media train for his company Anduril. And where there are a lot of parallels with what Charlie was just saying there, with AI, autonomous weapons, and faces, Palmer's thing is that he wants the United States to be the world's gun store for these autonomous weapons, kind of, further putting out that plausible deniability circle. Well, again, Palantir is supposedly a private company, right? They're working with all these different government agencies as well, and they're targeting these people. Well, what kind of weapon systems are going to be utilized? Lucky Palmer's weapon systems. We're not just talking about traditional drones, air, water, you name it. He's doing it right now. And this is like the hip kid that brought us the Oculus Rift, owned by Meta now. So you see how incestuous this whole thing is. But it's okay, because he's got a cool little goatee. He wears sandals. He's in a Hawaiian shirt. And, he talks hip. What's he, like 30 something?
He's got an ironic mullet, Jason. What more could you ask for in a tycoon?
It's pretty wild. Again, but this shows you, and I'm just getting familiar with this guy. He seems on the level that he is a very intelligent person and at the helm of a lot of these things. But at the same time, all right, he's the guy that put out what becomes commercialized VR and like probably the biggest format out there. We know the Defense Department, DARPA, has had virtual reality for decades. We know that even side by side, you can go and see these rather crude machines where they were running film reels side by side, I think in the 50s, and had these type of VR experiences where you were like driving around. Obviously a lot more crude today, but that was commercially available then. So again, is this an anointed one? I mentioned Peter Thiel earlier. I briefly said Sean Parker. For those that don't know who Sean Parker was this kid who the CIA tried to recruit when he was 16, turned it down. All of a sudden he creates Napster. And not only does he create Napster, that turns into Spotify. And he's the Justin Timberlake character in the Facebook movie there. So it should show you how influential that guy becomes. And look, and by the way, Bilderberg attendee, never a steering member. I think he went once or twice. But to me, that illustrates the fact that, hey, maybe Sean Parker did turn down the CIA. But do you think the CIA gave up on Sean Parker? That's kind of my thing. It's like, whether you want to work for them or not, I see the boost of the software and the social media that he was involved in. It's hard for me to believe that there wasn't somewhere along the way that the intelligence agencies maybe at least pushed it along if he wasn't directly involved with them. And I'll cut it short there.
I often wonder, especially today with like the independent media overlap, how many people involved in that field don't know that they're being used or played. I think that's maybe the majority of what's going on. And I think that's a new kind of angle where these things go. And the same kind of point, you just don't know if it's just willful ignorance. Maybe they aren't even aware that's just funding that they're happy to take without even looking into it. We see that. And I'm talking about the side you're addressing, Jason, but it's also the same thing in independent media. But so it's interesting to think at every angle, I mean, even what we discussed just today, it's hard to ignore that all of this seems to have been long-term intelligence created startup entities, where they kind of place everything into position. You mentioned Palantir, total information awareness, Oracle, the same idea, Main Core we haven't talked about yet, or Lucky Palmer, and I mean all these different points. I mean, you could argue it's just coincidence that they all had the origin point with intelligence that, that's hard for me to wrap my mind around, and then of course we could overlap that with the bigger international picture with other international players that are really, really invested in the tech field and surveillance and all sorts of different things. So why don't we talk? Oh, go ahead.
Don't you find it funny that the origin stories are very similar? Freshman nerd in his Harvard dorm room starts a transformational technology company with stolen technology, takes it and it goes public and winds up making billions of dollars. Who am I talking about? Am I talking about Bill Gates? Am I talking about Mark Zuckerberg? Because it's the same origin story, identical. Or I started it out of my garage in Silicon Valley, like HP or like Apple or whoever. Google started it out of the garage. Something about these garages. I think really, if they want to give it one deviation, less connective tissue to the government, they just run it through the venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road, and then it's money that it looks like it's private money. And Peter Thiel's got a venture capital fund, I mean, he's so where is the money coming from? Well, it's coming from these VCs, and they're, it's seed funding and maybe a second round or whatever. And we're just trying to go public. And if you're a tech, guy starting your company, you're just constantly looking for money. I mean, it's half of your job is finding more money. Sometimes you don't get to choose who you take the money from, or and if the government comes to you or the CIA, maybe you go, no, I'm not interested. But what's the difference between Google Ventures and the CIA? To me, nothing really, and maybe just one layer of one hop away. But it feels like it gives tech companies plausible deniability to say, well, we're not taking money from the CIA, we're taking it from some VC, and it's like, well, yeah, but the CIA is on their board, so.
Right. And the question remains, or rather the point to make is that whether or not they're aware of it, if it's the case, is irrelevant in the context of whether this is what we're dealing with, and it's willful ignorance. And, a lot of people, I mean, it may even be that they just don't even care. Like maybe they have no objections anyway, so why even look? So it's just a very important thing to think about how much this overlaps. There's Derek come back and his internet had crashed. Well, I was going to jump into from there the larger conversation about where
Teal
this
took
goes.
me out.
Yeah, as well as maybe the main core point to discuss. But Derek, I'll throw it to you because you were going to go to a point there before we move forward.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out, I have my article. I don't know if you still have it pulled up, Ryan, the one, Welcome to the Palantir World Order. I had, basically this article is a summary of all the different projects Palantir is doing with the Trump administration. A few of them have been mentioned, the IRS partnership, helping ICE find people. They're working on a nuclear energy project, which is part of helping, power all the AI centers and data centers they want to build. And there's a few others, and each of these does have Palantir Teal connections. But I specifically have a section called the Doge Teal connection. And I was building on a previous article that I wrote right after the election, once Trump started naming people to his cabinet. And at that time, I found at least 10 people who were what I was calling Peter Thiel acolytes in Trump's administration in different positions. That's J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, David Sachs, Howard Lutnick, Jim O'Neill at the HHS, Ken Howry, who's the ambassador to Denmark, Jacob Hellberg, Michael Kratsios, and on. And then this is kind of like an update to it where there's been new reporting since then, some in the mainstream and just others digging. And I list out a bunch of people. I'm not going to go through all the names because the names probably won't be familiar to most people. But the point is, these are former employee of Palantir, former software engineer at Palantir, formerly of Anduril, which is another Teal project, chief information officer at Palantir, former Teal fellow, political donations from Teal, formerly Anduril. So these are just all sorts of different people in different places, but mostly working with Doge. And so by my last count, and this article is over a month now, there was 18 to 20 people directly connected to Peter Thiel. There may be some more, looser connections, but people who worked with him directly or received money from him, worked in one of his organizations, et cetera. And also, and I sent these other links, Ryan. I don't know if you were able to open them. They're in the private chat, but I can't claim credit for this. But somebody sent this to me this morning, that apparently the guy who, yeah, so this is like a thread. Shout out to Jurassic Carl. I have no idea who he is. He just sent this to me. But this thread goes through, and you can see how the name he's tagged is not showing up there because apparently the guy blocked him. But if you go to _J Baxter_, that guy apparently is a former Palantir employee. And in that thread, they show his resume and they show his positions with Palantir. And he's also, I think his title is Chief Engineer of Community Notes. So you got a former Palantir employee engineer who's actually in charge of Twitter's Community Notes program. And that's just another, see right there's Community Notes, founding ML lead, staff ML engineer at X, and from MIT. And yeah, you can get more into his background and find out he worked for Palantir. So that was just another random connection that I'd never heard of, but just to show this relationship between Doge, Elon Musk, Twitter, etc. I mean, there's so many of them. I'm sure the web is even bigger than I'm talking about here. And I'm sure you guys have other insights. But yeah, I just wanted to make that point that for those who don't quite realize how close Elon is to Palantir, there you go. You can go scroll through his resume and people can find that. It's extensive. It's extensive. And, you know, how that relates to whatever spat's going on with Trump. Obviously, we shared earlier, there's some theories, but all I know is that the current Trump administration, the second Trump 2.0, is knee deep with Palantir. And if Palantir isn't a description of, you know, isn't a representation of the deep state, I don't know what is, including the fact that we've already covered the CIA connections and origins, but I'll just reemphasize the two heads of the company. Many of them, you know, many of the other co-founders are also connected to the PayPal mafia, but Alex Karp and Peter Thiel are Bilderberg steering committee members. So that means next week, when this hidden ruling class that, as Jason Burma said, no mainstream media is reporting on, barely independent media still pays attention to it these days, the two heads of this massive company with all these U.S. contracts and military industrial complex contracts will be, you know, steering that meeting along with other people, including former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt.
And I think this is, you know, it's so hard to miss how invasive, how completely all-encompassing this has become. And maybe you don't mind that. Maybe you think this is somebody, you know, just going after the deep state data, despite very clearly taking all of the personal data about you, and that's been, you know, verified. You know, argument being out there today that they're just going to use this to go after the other, you know, the bad government, which is just patently false. So let's talk about where this goes forward. I want to talk about the overlap of this as it goes into the connection of the Great Reset, let's say, Build Back Better. And then let's talk about the AI direction and how that's becoming all-encompassing everywhere. But I was hoping to get Jason's thought on this since he put this out. But I think this is a very important thing to think about, right? Where, and there's not to be that you think it is the same thing or the same people, but that the idea of where the Great Reset, you know, the World Economic Forum kind of vision and where that's going, what do you guys think about that in regard to what's currently happening? Is it the same thing? Is it just the different flavor? I'm curious what you guys think.
Well, let me just say this, just because Derek has been mentioning Alex Karp a lot. Alex Karp is kind of on that media hype train via the World Economic Forum and these other globalist institutions constantly. He's the one showing up to CES. I forget exactly. I'm not sure if it was the World Economic Forum. It may have been one of those offshoots, but just 3 weeks ago, I did a watch along with him on a forum with other people from Google and other international AI companies kind of talking about this. You know, it was always unsettling to me and always a bit surreal. I remember not believing it when it first came across during the COVID 1984 nightmare that there was this idea of a Great Reset by the World Economic Forum. I'm like, no. They're not really doing this. And then there was that panel with Schmidt, with Kissinger before he died, you know, espousing this Great Reset agenda on behalf of the World Economic Forum. I was kind of blown away. You know, I think they are in line with the same agenda. But again, you have to have those opposing sides, right? You've got so many of these people blindsided by the idea that Peter Thiel is some kind of libertarian, right? That's the mask that he wears. Yet, you know, you go back to my 2013 film Shade, and Webster Tarpley, probably one of the biggest socialists out there, rightly pointed out that Thiel had plans for a private island with no laws whatsoever. And if you think that that's fiction, remember, this is the guy that got convicted in a court of law for running offshore experiments to try to cure herpes. I wonder why, Pete. I'm just saying, like a guy that will be that wild is wild enough to try to create his own island or his own vision for government. And, you know, Alex Karp doesn't get brought in. And you look at Karp and he's got such Gates vibes, right? Like, let's put the sweater on Karp. You know, let's put the wacky glasses and the haircut on Karp. Every time I see Karp actually get challenged on his bull snap, he does not do well. He gets extremely excited. He talks extremely quickly. And he basically, you know, gives this jingoistic, you know, answer that we've got to do it or the bad guys are going to do it. So we're going to do it. That's it, right? That's the big thing. And when Peter Thiel was put on the spot again on Lavender, I mean, it's the clip of the year so far. He's visibly uncomfortable. He forgets the second part of the question altogether and has to ask it. He stutters, he stammers, and then he gives, again, this Johnny nonsense answer that if he capitulates to her point and even makes a comment on it, then somehow we're governing the world from Cambridge. As if Palantir isn't advocating to be a large part of the global police force anyway, and not just advocating for it, they're part of it.
I don't know, man. According to Alex Jones, they're just a little startup company that, you know, and they're really shaking up the deep state because they're outside. That's what he said. That's what he, like, word for word, what he said on his show.
I heard that original rant. He walked a lot of that back today, is all I'm going to say. Stone came on, and Stone was rightfully more
well,
critical.
because it doesn't matter what you said.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Steve. I'm just telling you he walked a bunch of that Palantir stuff back. I watched, but listen, I watched that original. You know, Palantir's just coming in and trying to, you know, become, you know, challenge the old deep state Raytheon.
Turns out I looked into it, and hey, y'all, to the best of my determination now, not yesterday. I was busy. I was barbecuing. I was out with my family. I took a dip in the river. I communed with nature and the Lord. But today, this morning, I looked into it a little bit, and I found out maybe they're not the best.
And he also blamed it on the left, which it's cartoonish, the argument that was made based on basic facts that anybody can prove. That's what really frustrated me about it. We laughed about it on AM Wake Up, and it's that, you know, the point is simply that it's very clear that there's an army of sycophants out there that are going out of their way. Like, I laugh more about the, you know, Benny Johnson cat turd type. They're like, it's a great day and Trump's doing everything we want, you know, winning, hashtag promises kept, all day, like just trying to put out these side steps to be like, don't pay attention to it's that meme. Everything's fine. That's what I feel all day today. They're all going like, everything's okay. Stop paying attention. But I think that the Karp aspect of it is correct, as you said. And by the way, Jason, before I forget, send me a link to Shade so I can include that in the show notes. I wasn't able to find it on, you know, one that I want to share. But the clip for Karp that I'll play in a second is worth watching because he is on a recent channel. I think it's MSNBC, and it's just very apparent. I think it was Jimmy Dore that said, you know, she doth protest too much, kind of a point where it's just like, you can clearly tell that he's like just freaking out about what the New York Times is writing. And I think he's lying in very basic ways. But I'd like to talk about.
I want to add something to that.
Oh, go ahead.
Real quick before about what Jason said, just to pick up on that thread, because you know, we talk about Alex Karp and Jason's right. He deserves more attention. Peter Thiel is becoming more well known, but also we have to think about Palmer Luckey. I saw somebody mentioned him in the comments. He's also a lesser known Palantir co-founder. I encourage people to go watch this short interview he did. Okay, well, I just want to mention he was on 60 Minutes recently, and he basically did the same dance that Karp did that you were just describing, Jason, where he just like, well, you know, we got to do some stuff. He's like, he's the cool flip-flop wearing, you know, mullet having billionaire, you know, PayPal mafia, and just they try to brand him. He's just such an outsider, renegade. But he had the same kind of responses that both Karp and Thiel. Thiel said, oh, well, I just defer to Israel. Whatever they do, you know, I just trust the IDF. They know what they're doing. And Karp's like, well, we're trying to kill terrorists, and maybe we kill some people, other people. And Palmer Luckey pretty much has the same argument. They're like, well, we got to build these things. Otherwise, other bad people will. And that might lead some bad places, but if we don't do it, other people are going to. So I just want to mention, I'm glad you guys talked about him before, but none of them have any sort of morals or any ethics about this at all.
If
they
Jimmy
also don't have any
Buffett was
children.
a war criminal, it would be Palmer Luckey. That's all I'm saying.
Another common denominator I think is important. None of these guys have children. They have no stake in this.
Right.
This is a common thread I've noticed with a lot of these guys. Yeah, you know, I think your worldview changes. I mean, it has to when you have kids, and some people, you know, age is a thing. Some in the case of Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, it's their sexuality prevents them from having kids unless they want to buy them. But there's a lot of this going on. I'm very distrustful of those people. The people that are running weapon systems that don't have any skin in the game is a big problem to me.
I agree. I mean, you guys, let's just play that. It's a little bit long. We can stop it if you guys like. Let's play this clip. And anybody jump in, you want to have a comment, I'll pause it. Let's watch this. So I think this is actually a really, I feel it's like self-evident that he's really uncomfortable. And as you said, he's usually pretty erratic. To me, this seems like it's on overdrive. And this was very recently post New York Times article on how they discussed this. Jump in if you have a comment.
The Palantir platform, despite what you might read at the New York Times, is actually the most secure, the hardest platform in the world to manipulate and change. Of course, any technology can be abused. But if you wanted to abuse the technology, if you wanted to use the deep state to unlawfully surveil people, the last platform on the world you would pick is Palantir because of the granular way we segment and put together, and the security models and the access control models that are in Foundry natively, not a built-on addendum. And by the way,
I'll add that Foundry I looked into in general, and it's not hard to find these overlaps, especially since they align themselves with the strategic partnership with Israel in January 2024. But the Foundry is very much overlapped with Israel in a lot of ways. And Foundry is like the main thing being put into every one of these, agencies in this country to secure the data. So even if it is as secure as they say, which I wouldn't doubt, it's about who has access to that and who can use it. And it's clear who does today.
That focus on civil liberties is making us really rich, which drives the woke, pagan, religious practicing, Neanderthal thinking people who ignore technology absolutely nuts on the right and the left while we're building value. By the way,
Did he just admit there's a woke left and woke right? I think he did.
I asked for permission before I went nuts from our wonderful, slightly conservative, and highly substantive partner. And he gave me permission to embarrass him. He didn't realize it'd be this embarrassing.
I think it comes with the territory.
These are my views, not his.
Okay, so Alex, let's get into that. New York Times has an article. Here's the headline. Trump taps Palantir to compile data on Americans. They paint a pretty Orwellian picture of what you and the Trump...
Yeah, no, please jump in. That's anytime you have a comment. Go ahead.
Did Elon drop by Alex's office and be like, yo, buddy, I'm gonna need you to hold my briefcase. They're kicking me out of DC this weekend. And Alex like cracked it open. All of a sudden it started glowing like on Pulp Fiction. And it was just, Mars era ketamine. And he was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this with my daily Adderall and my cocaine. And then got on TV to go do that because he was out there waving his arms like he was being inflated and trying to sell used cars in a bad neighborhood. He was out there flopping. It was a little weird. It was. That's supposed to be a speech that lends confidence.
Yeah.
To the Charlie, you're in media relations. Explain this, man. Juxtapose that with what you would tell a 22-year-old athlete.
He looks like he's selling washing machines on Memorial Day weekend. He's out of control. When the Adderall kicks in, you just have to go with it, I suppose.
Has anybody seen the movie 12 Monkeys?
Yeah.
Remember Brad Pitt in that?
Yeah, you're right. He has a very similar.
He's very similar energy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point. I mean, the character is meant to be erratic and like mentally unstable, right? And so it's a good parallel if you think about it.
This is a guy who thinks he's going to be thrown out of a window by far right Hamas at any given moment, and that's why he needs security at all times. Like those are his words.
I want the guy in charge of all the data to be a very calm, cool nerd, not some guy who looks frantic like this, like Alex Karp does.
Give me like an early 1980s Pan Am pilot before they went under.
Absolutely.
Somebody who's been through a little bit, and okay, maybe maybe he has a drink or two on his off hours, but mostly he's just there to get you safe and get you home. All right, you guys, we're going to be going through a little bit of turbulence, but it's okay. That's who you want. You don't want wacky hair, inflatable arm guy.
Yeah, that's a good parallel too. But I think it's the point is that it demonstrates that they're very, very uncomfortable right now. Because he's erratic anyway, but he's put out there because they, knowledgeable, I guess, or whatever. But all of them, we can play the short compilation of Teal as well. And this is it's not just today. You understand, as you pointed out before, it's when they get asked about what they're doing in Israel, they seem to melt down. I think that says a lot. So you want to keep playing this, guys?
Sure.
Administration I was walking over here. I picked a random engineer, and I said, by the way, we have a contest. Find all the technically absolutely erroneous things in this article in 90 seconds. And I picked a random engineer. I was like, well, how many do you think you could do in 90 seconds? He's like, well, 15, 20.
Why 90 seconds?
But leaving aside the technical, look, it's probably
wrong.
hard
Is that
for
what you're
them,
saying?
I'm sure. Well, it's not. Well, first of all, on the tech side, It is so ridiculous. I read the New York Times. It's literally like I'm a dyslexic. They might as well be hiring me to do a spelling bee. So, maybe they just have friends who are tech bros, but they can't hire on a meritocratic basis. I don't know. So that's up to them. We have a contest. Find all the errors in 90 seconds. I think somebody will find 50 or 60. But the more important thing is we are not surveilling Americans. We are not building a database to surveil. And if you wanted to do that, the last platform in the world you would buy is Palantir. And don't believe me, spend 10 minutes and look at the architecture of our product. 10 minutes. And then see how ridiculous that is. By the way, writing ridiculous shit in a highly charged environment is dangerous. And the New York Times should take responsibility for the danger they're putting out in the world. There really are people who believe that crap.
Well,
they believe that.
One thing that's true, though, is that you have increased your contracts with the government, and that has accelerated
so
under the Trump administration.
Of course, but by the way, even there, a mathematically somewhat moderately literate person would say, okay, well, they're increasing the government by 45%. That's pretty baller. How are they increasing in the U.S. commercial? 71%. Are we building a database to conspire against our own people in the U.S. commercial context with no sales force? So we're winning. Yeah, great. You know what? Tell everybody we're winning. We are winning. And by the way, we have a rule of 83 while we do it. Basically means we don't have or have basically inept sales force, and we're winning. And we know what?
What's that? Go ahead.
I was just saying he definitely seems like he's on drugs, and I don't even mean that in a jokey way. Like literally, he seems like he got hopped up, and maybe it was just the nerves or whatever. I was gonna say too that we've seen the Teal clip. He can't answer any questions. Carp, the other one I think Jason was referring to. There's this one, but there's also him being confronted at like a campus and a woman screaming, saying, "Your technology kills Palestinians. Your technology kills Palestinians," and he's just like, I don't think these. I mean, we have to remember that a lot of these big tech folks they sort of, including Elon, some of them proudly claim that they're on the autism spectrum, right? So maybe there's some element of that, but I just think in general, this is a super defensive response.
Yes.
Like the way he's acting is not the way somebody who's confident and is like, no, they're incorrect. I'm here with my attorney. Here's the statements that are wrong, whatever, it's just flipping out and assuring everybody that we're winning, we're making money, we're doing this. And and then claiming in 90 seconds they can find 50 to 60 things wrong. Not to come to the defense of the New York Times or anything, because as I said earlier, a lot of the stuff in the Times article is stuff that's been out in independent media for quite a while, just taking note of the different relationships, as well as noticing the Trump executive order. As soon as it happened, I remember seeing that and thinking, here's some post 9/11 talk again. We need to remove the borders between different agencies because, 9/11 happened because these agencies couldn't talk to each other quick enough. It's the same stuff. And Trump's executive order was about streamlining that and taking the agencies out of being in separate silos and making it easier for them to communicate and work together to fight bad guys or whatever. And that's exactly the role that Palantir is playing. And of course, he doesn't get into, as everything we've already covered today, CIA connections. Nobody at all in the mainstream, of course, is going to ask these guys about their relationship and their steering committee spots at the Bilderberg Group and things of that sort.
Exactly.
I just want to jump in quick because I think that Derek's right. I mean, I wasn't expecting him to go like full Charlie Sheen Tiger Blood winning, but he does. And one of the weird things that he keeps doing in this is he talks first. He said, how many mistakes can you find in 90 seconds to an engineer? He says 15. And then he goes, maybe you can find 50 or 60 in 90 seconds. Yeah, he doesn't mention one mistake, right? It seems like, and he also throws in the word Neanderthal and pagan. So, I mean, this is like classic smear techniques, right? There's not one, and no point at all did he address, okay, well, they said this, and this is the truth. And he could have done that in any sentence. So I think it kind of does speak. I had not seen this clip, I'll be honest. I'd only seen other clips. Every time the guy gets challenged and he just doesn't have an open forum to spew his Johnny nonsense, he gets extremely uncomfortable. And I mean, yeah, he was wacky, inflatable. I like to use my hands. He was using a lot of handage right there, but not saying a lot. So if you want to continue, I'm enthralled.
Yeah. Well, just real quickly, the point you're making is important, or in general, this is what they put out right afterward. I think this is very relevant. It says the recently published article by the New York Times is blatantly untrue, but it says Palantir never collects data to unlawfully surveil Americans. Now that's a big difference than what he just said. And he's saying we don't surveil people. Well, that's not what he said there. And I think the main point is they're trying to make the subtle argument that we're doing so, but it's because the president wants us to, or because that's what our legislation says, or whatever. And even then you could argue just because the president says it or there's legislation doesn't then make it legal. That's a whole important thing to think about, but that's just very important. The story continues to evolve as he makes the narrative. And I think you've all made some very good points here. Let's keep watching.
The word unlawfully is doing a lot of work there, right?
Exactly.
But I got to dip, guys. Thanks for having me on, Ryan, and everybody. And I'll see you guys on the next panel.
Awesome, brother. See you then.
Because the product is the best in the world. And you know what the Trump administration is actually doing? Every other government in the world is doing, because everyone wants to beat China, who's not China, is buy the best product. What is the best product? They're not buying our product because they like me or they like my speeches. Honestly, he's wondering why he has to buy the product from me too.
He just said that everybody wants to be like China. Just so that's clear. I just think there's the many things he says in this that are him, I think, radically trying to like escape this. And he's calling, woke left, woke right. The idea that if we understand that the U.S. government at the very least is striving to be like China, I think we already know that. That's just that's not what they wanted to say. That's what I would think.
He's not lying in this. The thing is that everybody in his world does want it to be like China. That he's just pulling off. He's drawing off of everybody at Bilderberg, everybody at the WEF, everybody in Silicon Valley. Everybody wants to be like China. No. You guys want it to be like China. The rest of us want nothing to do with it. But he's so in the cult that in his world, it's everybody.
It's a great point. And that speaks to just them being completely out of touch. They might as well a different species today in the billionaire oligarch elitists and everybody else. There is a very interesting distance that has developed in that regard.
Buy it because I'm going to make your company really, really financially strong, more secure, more efficient, increase the revenues. Why does the U.S. government buy the product? First of all, it's a product. It's not a waste of time service BS thing that can be abused. By the way, we lost so much revenue in the last 20 years because people wanted to buy things that could be abused. It's really hard to abuse Palantir. You could do services. Who knows what a services company is doing with your data? Or you could do what the New York Times does or consumer internet does. You could resell the data and productize your users. By the way, there's a high correlation between productizing your users and selling them woke pagan BS.
It's a good point. What are you doing at the IRS?
You can't get that with Palantir, but you can't.
The IRS was one example.
Yeah, we have so many contracts in the U.S. government. I'll tell you, without the specifics, I can tell you exactly what we're doing in the IRS. We're going to use the most secure platform in the world to replace inept software with cheaper, better software that is more efficient. That's what we're doing. I assume at the IRS, we have so many contracts. I know that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing with 71% of growth. You know what we're doing in the DOD? We're scaring the bejeebers, I'm trying not to use the F word, out of our adversaries by making them scared at night. And you know how we're doing it? By installing productized software that runs algorithms against data that's been lawfully collected. and you can't unlawfully use it.
So you are surveilling Americans. I'm glad we cleared that up at the end of the interview when you said in the beginning that you weren't surveilling Americans flatly. That seems relevant.
I think that in the new Terminator movie, they come back to get him, don't they? He's the guy that they come back from the future, right? That's the guy that they've made the calculation. We got to take him out.
Oops. Missed that up. There we
After
go.
making a quick stop at Curtis Yarvin's house.
How did I just mix that up? Hold on. How did I get back to the right spot here? There we go. So sorry, I just hit the wrong button there. But this was the extension of the point, is that on Wired, this is yesterday. Palantir is going on defense. And that doesn't mean working with the Defense Department. Like Palantir threatened to call the police on a Wired reporter and kicked out the other journalists from a recent conference following reports on what's going on right now. They're analytics with the Trump administration. So this is, again, as we've been pointing out, this is not what it looks like to explain that you're being misrepresented, especially with the most powerful backing and friends in the world. Like, why would he feel so? Like, I just get the sense that they are concerned. And I know it's not really in our benefit to think that, because, who knows? Yeah. But I get that sense that that's desperation. I don't know what you guys think. And all these kind of moves show that they're, circling the wagons to a degree. Anybody disagree or confirm? What do you think?
I'd be very careful if I were a reporter digging into Palantir. You know what I mean? It's an extremely dangerous company. And for, you may work at Wired and you think you're going to do a story. These guys are they're just dangerous. And this is a very, I don't know, important time for people to be paying attention to what's going on. Unfortunately, they're not. I feel the vast majority of people are falling asleep at the wheel. But I would say continue the pressure, especially if you've got a video interview with a guy like Alex Karp or Peter Thiel. Treat it like a police interrogation. Keep that guy talking as much as he can. The more he says, the more he steps on his dick over and over again and says something that, like everybody wants to be like China. You're not supposed to say that. That's not supposed to come out. That's not that's not the messaging that you want. I honestly, if I were, I'm not trying to give these guys any ideas, but from my media training background, I'd get this guy as far away from television cameras as possible.
Right.
And he would be the last interview he ever did.
Doesn't that add an interesting point to this, though? Like, so why? That's, I think, something I ask all the time when you see them do something ridiculous, or a politician does something. You're like, where are their handlers? Don't they say that's not the right thing to do? And it makes you wonder then why. That's not all encompassing, but why they would, And so in this case, why are we seeing this happen? Why are these people being chosen to put out front? It makes me question whether I think that there's an outside influence that is in whether collapsing this country or overtaking it or manipulating policy. I think that may be a large part of it. I don't think our current government, as we see it, is truly dictating everything that's happening here. Go ahead.
There are systems have redundancies in place. They have fail safes, to make a historical comparison, there was the quiz show scandal in the late 50s, early 60s, in which Congress started investigating the quiz shows. And the response was to wheel out the contestants that had cheated under probably instruction from producers and everything, and they were made to apologize and everything, and everyone started talking about the contestants. No rules really changed, and nobody really cared. In this situation, you have Palantir, which is getting some negative press. So what do? You wheel out Captain Crazy Arms to spout nonsense on MSNBC for 2 hours, and suddenly he becomes associated with Palantir completely. He's the one defending it. He gets kicked out by his board, or he gets sent down on some trumped up corruption thing, and people can say the problem has resolved itself. Palantir can be broken up. Palantir doesn't exist anymore, but instead we'll have Barad-Dur. We'll have Barad-Dur Communications, and they will take over the staff and take over the technology, but they won't be Palantir anymore, and people will consider things to have changed.
Yeah, and you could say the same thing with Elon Musk and Trump. That that kind of idea could be applied to any of these. That's an excellent point.
It's already happened with Eric Prince and Blackwater, and now Academy.
Right.
And now Eric Prince is, up to his neck in the private prison in El Salvador game, along with sending 150 mercs to Haiti in the last week and a half, and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. And yeah, all he had to do was rebrand a little bit. It's a little rebranding goes a long way, really does.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and get into the kind of ask the final part of this in regard to the, as I see, the AI element of it all, and the possibility, as my mind goes to, of where I think the large part of this is simply AI government. Not necessarily AI governance, which is part of what's happening now using the GSA iBot and different things, the commerce point in the bill, but like an AI government kind of idea, and or any other direction you want to take it in. Palantir AI, how that applies. Before we jump in, I'll just read a couple things from a great article that Off Guardian put out recently. Just general points I thought were interesting, and they simply wrote that this isn't about protecting freedom. That seems to be the very clear overlap to all of this. It's about rendering freedom obsolete, and I thought that was a very perfect way to think about that. As well as Palantir itself admits that its mission is to augment human decision making, and so I think that you just can't miss, especially with the bill aspect, whether it goes through Senate or not. That's what they're putting forward. So anybody want to jump in where you want to go with it? Go ahead.
You know, I just want to talk about the AI aspect because, again, that's making, mainstream media or mainstream alternative media that in this big, beautiful bill, supposedly you're going to have this 10-year window where AI cannot be prosecuted or you can't sue it, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's almost a moot point. I think that's just solidifying or codifying what's already been going on from the first Trump administration into the Biden administration, especially with the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer program, and now into the Trump administration. I have literally heard nobody else in media talk about the CAIO program that clearly outlines that you have the intelligence community and the defense community, and they are allowed to do with whatever they want with AI, and it is unauditable. And then there's subsidiaries that they work with. Everybody else has to have a chief artificial intelligence officer put into their private company that has a security clearance, and they can be audited at all times. That means there will literally be no innovation outside of government innovation. And it is that kind of walled garden that Mark Andreessen alluded to. But I have not seen how it's been fixed. I've only seen how it's getting worse and worse and worse.
It's because he thinks the good elitists, which are them, are going to save you. You'll be in the same place though, but they'll just rule the way that's what he basically argues.
Again, when you have that walled garden, where in order to use this software or develop hardware, you have to have constant government oversight in a classified realm. There's no way that you can become there. There's no capitalist model there, right? Unless it's fascist, right? I mean, we're going to pick the winners and losers. You get out of line, we're going to put you out of business. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. Really, the last real technology company that made a big splash that wasn't government subsidized was YouTube. And they got bought up by Google, which is just a rebrand of the government, right? I mean, I can't name another one that's had a huge impact socially or basically technologically. Can anybody out there in a commercial sense that hasn't been hampered or pushed by the government?
No, because if you need government, if you need licensing, you always fall in some way. You wind up under the thumb of the government. You have to do what they say in order to get the licensing. Or I can't think of one.
I don't know one. So again, I think that we're in a really odd spot. Artificial intelligence is becoming more and more commercially available in many other avenues. Video creation. I'm using it for my thumbnails. Obviously, you have the chat GPTs of the world. We just did our panel on AI, and a lot of that was the talk of using it for research. If you're now going to be feeding these language models certain types of information, and you're going to try to utilize lower and lower power. I mean, you look at DeepSeek in China, right? Just the fact that it was able to run on lower power. To have that walled off from the public is extremely dangerous, especially with the deceptive nature of AI. But it also, forget about the resource allocation, forget about the automation. Think of the narrative management. Like, the AI, in essence, the approved AI, is going to tell us what's real and what's not, what's a deep fake and what's not. And we're already seeing it create, some of it's fun. I talked about it the other day. I love a good parody song. Some of these videos are entertaining. I'm sure everybody saw that Door Brothers video that went viral with, Mark Zuckerberg as a lizard person and Donald Trump at a swingers party and Kamala Harris as a communist.
To me, though, all that is we'll make their arms work again, Neuralink, which is true, maybe, but that's not really what it's really all about. It's like that's the window dressing to get you. That's the bread and circuses as they, recreate history on a digital level in the background, whatever we're talking about.
Yeah. It's the backbone of the trust era for the product. Yeah.
Well, again, like I said, that's the stuff that's been able to go viral and kind of pierce maybe our arena, right? I wouldn't say it's mainstreaming, but in short order, again, we're going to see more and more of this stuff. It is going to be advocated as real, and the AI is going to constantly tell us that it's real. And how many people aren't questioning a damn thing? How many kids right now are going to Chat GPT to finish up their homework? It's a lot more than people think. And, a lot of people don't realize that they can take Copilot off Windows. Now, I'm not saying Windows is perfect or that it's not a defense, Microsoft isn't a defense company, but most people aren't even thinking of opting out, let alone figuring it out. They're embracing it. And I think that's a huge issue. And again, that walled garden is the big issue because we're talking about Palantir mostly today, but how many people are talking about that walled garden and what it means for all of these companies, military, industrial complex, or otherwise?
Jason, you mentioned how YouTube was doing this technology and then it wound up getting acquired by Google. I can envision a scenario in which in the future there becomes a company who is known as the gold standard for telling you whether it's AI fake or whether it's real. And it just gets... Everybody knows that that's who you go to. That's Google it, right? Well, whatever this new company is, do that to it, right? And it gets known for it. And then that company will get subverted and compromised or bought, or maybe even created from out of thin air with an understanding that that's going to be the role of it. Yeah, the fact checker, when the AI fact checker, the gold standard of AI fact checking is actually compromised. But if you want to do that the right way, then you need to be accurate for a while, right? You need to be 100% great at it. And then maybe it drops off to 95%. And then maybe it's just a little here, a little tweak there, but you've always got to maintain that it's working. You've got to do it that way in order to suck people in. And then as soon as they develop this level of trust where they outsource their thinking to this and they run it through their brand new AI bullshit detector, then it goes, well, it came back as good. Well, maybe it is good. But maybe what if it's that one little sliver? Maybe it's just in an area that you never even touch, but it has to do with the videos you see coming out of Israel or something like that. That's where they do. I could see that being the next a technological, transformative company that we wind up trusting in the future, only to be bamboozled by it.
Well, remember,
real quickly, that's a very prescient statement for those out there watching. I think we all probably agree with that right now. That's a really great point. So make a note of that, save that clip. That's going to come to pass. Again, I would argue it's going to be the whole, they created it as a front kind of thing, probably an Israeli company as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was just saying right now, like kind of an offshoot of that is Sam Altman's World ID company.
Yeah.
This is not only putting you on the blockchain as a person, but it's ensuring that you are not a deep fake, that you are not a computer generation. And it's doing so by taking your biometric information, you integrating on this blockchain network. And I'm not sure how far it's going to go, but again, they've taken the orb and they've made the Orb Mini that looks a lot more like a cell phone, which we're acclimated to. The Lochnar was a tough sell. And they've moved to the United States. They've gone to some pretty hip and cool spots. Remember, initially when this launched 2 or 3 years ago, they did have a spot where you could scan yourself at the bottom of the World Trade Center. You'd go down the escalators. It was in this kiosk and shop. Now they're in LA. Now they're in Austin, Texas. Now they're in Nashville, Ryan. You can go down, you can go check one out right now. They're trying to integrate it. When you start seeing commercials pop up for it on TV or in your YouTube ads, I think that's where they're going to be mainlining it even more. But I think that Charlie's right. There's going to be other companies that jump in with this technology as well. It doesn't necessarily mean monetizing people or biometrics. It could be just based on those deep fake videos, interactions. Not just going to be videos. I don't do it. I don't do the video calls. Like, I've had a couple girlfriends over the years. They're pissed because I don't have an iPhone. I've FaceTimed literally 0 times in my life. But how many people is that their main line of communication to somebody other than texting? I think that's something that's going to be hacked in the next 3 to 5 years, that you're going to get a FaceTime call. I mean, forget about the terrible bot fishes that want to meet you in Thailand and think you're cute, right? But like, those have gone from your spam DMs to what? Phone calls sometimes. I see them in Telegram all the time. I get text messages on my phone. What if that's a lifelike being? That's almost the argument for WorldCoin right now, but I think it's going to be the argument for a bunch of other tech. That being said, gentlemen, I do have to run. I hate to wrap it a little bit short. I want to thank everybody over at the IMA panel. You guys are kick-ass. I can't wait to do the next one. And everybody can check me out everywhere at Jason Bermas, BERMAS. I sent you shade in a DM so you can share it with everybody. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Well, it's probably a good place to generally wind down, but I feel like let's, if we could give some solutions in your mindset around, AI in general. Like, so I think the big point is just to lay that out there. We already touched on the idea of how the artificial intelligence aspect of this is becoming all consuming. And from a global perspective, obviously as well, but from a US perspective with the database discussion, the idea of the weird overlap of Doge and efficiency and AI government and where that seems to go. If you have any more thoughts just on that in general, I think it's important that we flesh that out. But what do you see going forward in the future? Do you have any thoughts on what people can do to pull themselves away, or just kind of end wherever you'd like?
Well, I mentioned earlier that the Panopticon works because people self-regulate. So the obvious solution that I can present to that would be not to, simply don't. Simply don't self-censor because you're afraid that something might happen. I think it's the only thing you can really think. And I would take, not exactly a solution, but I would take some positivity out of the idea of harvesting all the data on the internet, because I don't think that's necessarily useful. Like, you have to have processing power to parse this data, and there has to be a trust that the data is accurate. Like, you could scrape all the dating websites across the internet, and you'd find out that the average person is 6'1", 170 pounds, and nobody was born before 1979. But like, how useful is any of that data? And that will clash with data you have in other databases. So there is such a thing as like hoarding data for data's sake, and I think they are at that point. And I'm not sure really how much practical use they can put it to yet.
It's a good point, but I will add that at least the argument was that the reason it's progressed beyond like using AI on XAI or on Twitter, which is the same thing now, is because, as you point out rightly, it takes, like, even Grok has shown that it takes a level of it's a grade score based on people just write online, I'm whatever, and that gets added to whether that might be the reality. And a lot of people lie on social media. And so it's not as high level, but they argue that the government level data that they've had access to, it's the gold standard of data. Maybe not to the point you're saying, but you have the claim, you've got the follow through, you've got the outcome, you've got it's really hard to deny that gives you at least the best possible picture, if it's even possible to do what they're trying to achieve, as Whitney would argue it may not be. But I think it's a great point, but I worry that might have been why they bull rushed into this position.
I think James Corbett would tell everybody to salt their information to the extent that they can. Make sure that you're not giving up your privacy or your information. It's kind of hard these days, but he tells a story of how he gets a message once a year from a bunch of random people that wishing him happy birthday. It's because that's just the date he picked on, like, Skype, that was his birthday when they asked him. And so, I think it's a good point. Information overload. Sure. I think that they could drown in data overload here. They've got all this, but they don't really know what to do with it. I would also, remind people that there is a level of incompetence too. And once you get a machine as big as the American government or the empire, you know, that there's a lot of inadequacies. There's a lot of people that you know, a lot of sections that don't talk to each other. So we should be aware of it, of course, and we should be paying attention and positioning ourselves out of the way to the extent that we can. But also, they make a lot of mistakes. You know, they could have a 10-step plan to tyranny, but if they can't get off of the third step in this, then what good is, you know, the rest of it? So if we need to make things as difficult for them as possible, obviously do not comply where you can, where you can't. I mean, I get this minor, you know, point every time I fly when you go through and look into the camera, I go, no, I opt out. Oh, okay. You know, are they collecting there's 18 cameras that caught me walking in the airport and walking to am I on camera? Of course I'm on camera. But I'm not looking in that camera simply because you want me to, and I don't have to. And it's optional for now, which at some point won't be. So don't make it easy for them. You know, don't walk into their. We're already sort of stuck in this to the extent, you know, we can't necessarily get out of all of it, but make it hard and don't give them anything.
You're
here. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, you can conduct a lot of your business, if not most of your business, in person with one other person, and you don't have to do it online. You don't have to do it over the phone. You don't have to do it through third-party payment processors. You know, most of it. Some of it, you know, you whatever. But you can take steps every single day that help get you a little bit further away from, you know, the state in terms of what their reach and their impact is on you. And just about everybody involved here has been screaming about this for a very long time. And everybody's own, you know, websites and shows are a wealth of resources for how you can do this, going back for quite a while now. So it's a really cool thing to be a part of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've had a lot of important discussion today and a lot of great points were made. And I definitely think that, you know, we're the same message from everybody. You know, it's important today that we are skeptical, right? There's a lot of reasons to be concerned about where this goes. None of us have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's coming. But as Steve says, we've been calling this out for a long time in a lot of specific ways that are exactly happening. And so right now, I think it's an important inflection point where you can see this partisan kind of explosion. And I think, as usual, as we've seen from kind of the last few, I think, clumsy events, people are getting shaken free. And I think they get a little bit more concerned about that. Now, maybe that's wishful thinking. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I feel that. I sense that. And I think every agenda that keeps happening from COVID to now, people are just not buying it. And I think you get the erratic Alex Karps out there that everything's fine, you know? And so I think it's important just to be skeptical about all this, to be aware of where it goes, and don't just follow along. As Charlie says, don't do the old, well, they already have everything, so why not? Even if that's true, don't make it that easy for them, right? You don't know what's coming next. You don't know what that last thing could mean. And I'll just leave it with the point that you have to realize how all-encompassing this truly is and how long it's been happening. You know, it's the idea of healthcare we didn't even touch on today, right? You got this overlap with Palantir and teletracking. You got Palantir and Tiberius, which was Biden's administration, into Trump's administration. You got all these different overlaps, and it is all literally coming together. And I can't not see that as any one of the part, as the whole thing being the entire agenda, not one element of it, but all of it together, because this is bigger than health. It's bigger than policing. It's bigger than all it is bigger than we've seen. And I genuinely think this is, whether we're talking about the Patriot Act kind of surveillance state into the technocratic state and the surveillance aspect therein, whatever you see it is, just, you know, help inform people, give them information here, look through the source material we provide, which I will after we're done, and help us fight this, because I genuinely think this is going in a very, very dangerous direction. And I'll point out things like this as well. The U.S. proving CRISPR food, the idea that there's now a overlap of convergence of CRISPR and artificial intelligence and the paradigm shift therein, and the idea that this is now being used, you know, you can see them idea with AI with making new injections that nobody wants, AI with food that we didn't want before when it was Bill Gates. I mean, I guess because the AI overlap, it's suddenly somehow different. I'll shout out the article I mentioned earlier from Off Guardian. Trump's Palantir-powered surveillance is turning America into a digital prison. So I hope everybody could gain from this today. We will be having a lot more panels coming your way. Thank you all for being here. And as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.